In an hour's time, wee Jimmy Cranky takes on Big Daddy and wins in the first of a new series of Tales of the Unexpected. Coming up next, it's the 80s Nostalgia podcast, and this week's guest is filmmaker, novelist and Spectrum Addict, Andy Remic.
I used to do a paper round, and I'd been to my friend's house. One friend had a VIC-20 and another friend had a Spectrum 16K, and when I saw the Spectrum playing Jetpack, that was me. That was like, wow, I have to have one of these. So I did a paper round, and on a Saturday, usually the papers were late, so you'd be kicking around in the newsagents waiting for the papers to be delivered so you could deliver them. And I used to just read through all the computer magazines. So I started pestering my dad, like, I really, really want this computer. I'll use it, honestly, I'll just use it for schoolwork. I'll use it for homework. Everyone's getting them to use them for homework. And bless him, instilled a really good work ethic in me. He said, you've got your paper round money and you've got your birthday and Christmas coming up. If you can save half the money, I will give you the other half. So that was it then. I was doing my paper round, so I saved every penny from that. And then I came up with this scam in school, which is probably technically illegal, but I was a child at the time. So the scam was, there were kids who got free school dinners, but they would sell you their free school dinner tickets for like half the price of what I had to pay for school dinners. So I would make a profit there. So I would buy these tickets. But the problem was, every time you went up to the canteen to get your dinner, you had to sign the back of it. So I got caught, dragged into the deputy head's office. So I blagged it, managed to get away with it bizarrely for some reason. So then we just carried on. We didn't stop. We just carried on. And I used to sign the back of it, Mickey Mouse, the back of the school dinner tickets, which enabled me, I mean, it's something pathetic like £1.50 a week, but it all went into the pot to save up half of the amount for the Spectrum. And then one day I went to my dad and I said, yeah, I've got half the money. He said, right, that good to his word, let's do it. We went into a town called Bury and went to the shop and bought a Spectrum, which was about October 1984. So I didn't actually technically get it for Christmas, but then I started saving for games. And I remember seeing a magazine review of Underworld. It was like a double page thing, and it was Underworld and Night Law. I saw Night Law and went, like, I was basically dribbling, to be honest. To see that as a 13-year-old, it was like, I can't believe what I'm seeing. It's reality. And then my very wealthy Auntie Anne gave me £10 for Christmas. So I bought Night Law. And what I did was, just leading up to Christmas, I bought a load of games and then I wouldn't play them. So I'd wrap them up for myself. Like my Spectrum presents to myself. And that carried on for years, actually. It's a really bizarre thing to do, I think, maybe. I don't know. But every Christmas, about October, I would start buying all the best games, in my opinion, the best games, depending on reviews, obviously. And I wouldn't play them. And I'd save them all for Christmas Day, so I'd have every Christmas was just amazing because I had all these amazing games to play.
But you knew what you were getting, though. Does it not spoil it for you?
Well, I didn't know what I was getting because I'd not played them. So, there were some disappointments there, obviously. But not many, to be honest. I was a Spectrum addict. I really was.
Did you have a computer before your Spectrum, or did you go on any consoles before that?
I just had the Atari VCS, which, I got that about a year before the Spectrum. I did actually get that one for Christmas, and it did its job. I played Space Invaders and Combat. Amida, I think, was another game. But the games were so expensive. That was the problem. And obviously, the minute I got the Spectrum, like, a friend down the road gave me a cassette with Jetpack, Trans Am, Psst, and Cookie. But because he had a 16K Spectrum, he could only give me the 16K games. But it started me off, and then I bought Saberwolf, which was just, that blew my mind. I remember endless afternoons just playing that game, and like friends would come round and we'd just play Sabre Wolf endlessly, like taking turns. That first moment when you hit the bottom of the map with the purple mountains and the bloody wolf, and you're like, "What do I do? Run away! Run away! Run away!"
It's terrifying. It's only like little blue rabid dog thing.
You're right though. The word was terrifying. I was terrified when I met that wolf. It's like, no, don't kill me. Yeah, and obviously it did. Damn them Stamper Brothers.
What were the first games, and what did you have in your collection as you built it up?
I had everything. I started off obviously with like this, I said, the Ultimate games, Jetpack and stuff like that. Then I got Night Law. Because I got my Spectrum in the October, like I showed it to all my friends, and they just like begged and nagged their parents mercilessly. So my nephew. Right, my brother's quite a bit older than me, so my nephew was more like my brother. So we spent a lot of time together, and he nagged and nagged his dad to get a Spectrum. And my best mate, Darren Ralph, he nagged and nagged his parents to get a Spectrum. So they both got Spectrums that Christmas. So they obviously got their own games. Ralphie, he was really into Kevin Tom's Football Manager and cricket games, and anything sporty like that. And Paul and me, I remember him getting Strange Loot and Cosmic Kanga.
Oh, I remember Cosmic Kanga, yeah.
Yeah, it's actually quite good at with the Spectrum films. There's this lovely guy called Dave Bulwer who did the screen grabs for Bedrooms to Billions. He does all the screen grabs for me on the Spectrum films. So I just give him like a huge list, and he's like, "Oh, you like 50, 60 games on this list." But then he's like a workaholic. Like, I'll give him a list, and within 3 days he's done like 50 games. Much kudos to Dave Bull for that. And recently, because I've not played it for a long time, and he did Cosmic Kanga, and I was watching it thinking, that's actually quite good. I like that. I can see why I liked it back in Christmas 1984.
Reminded me a little bit of a combination of Whizball and Trailblazer, I think.
Yeah, but they came later though, didn't they?
They did, yeah. But looking back, I think maybe that influenced them, I don't know. But I like having games where I've got control. Whizball really annoyed me. You go in a certain direction for a certain length of jump. You know, you can't. If you jump too far, you may hit something that you can't see on the screen just yet.
Yeah, there were problems with Whizball, though, weren't there, on the Spectrum? Because it's Sensible Software who developed that, John Hare. And as far as I'm aware, there were problems with the Spectrum development of that. Because I know that Mark R. Jones, who did the graphics for it, he said that a lot of his graphics were unused, and the original development of it was unusable, and they had to get another guy to write it on the quick. I've only ever played it on the Spectrum, so I can't compare it to anything else, another version. But apparently it's quite different on the Spectrum. It's like a Whizball Lite.
Which magazines do you remember from the 80s? Did you get your Sinclair, your Spectrum, Crash?
The very first magazine I bought was PCG, and because I was a paper boy, and I'd be waiting for the papers to arrive on a Saturday afternoon, much to my misery. So then I'd just pick up and read all the magazines off the shelf. I used to get £2.80 a week. So to buy a magazine for £1 was like a third of my wages. So I'd read them on the shelf, and then I'd just pick random magazines. And they were all great. I loved them all, to be honest. And then I discovered Crash. And it was the covers. It was Oliver Frey's artwork that drew me in. Unfortunately for me, I didn't discover Crash. I think it was the newsagents didn't stock it for quite a while. And then I saw it, and it was like, wow! And I bought it, and then a couple of issues later, they had the big Running with Sinclair user, I think it was, where they did a spoof, and it was withdrawn from the circulation. And it was like, I was distraught. I was absolutely, genuinely upset that Crash wasn't out that month. From my perspective, it just wasn't there on the shelf. So it was like, oh no, where's Crash gone? And obviously, they'd off Sinclair user who took legal action.
My friend got it on subscription, Crash, so he got the insert. Well, he got the 4-page special at the back, but I never got to see it because, like you say, it was withdrawn from all the newsagents around here.
Well, my newsagents was just around the corner from where I lived, so mine was just a reserved issue, which is why if you look carefully, actually, in some of the Spectrum Addict films, if there's a copy of a Crash cover, you'll see it says Remic in the top corner because they used to write my name on it. It didn't even receive it. They didn't receive the magazine, so they couldn't distribute it.
So the magazine covers in your film are the actual magazines you owned?
Yeah, definitely.
That's very cool.
Yeah, I've still got them all. I've got a big pile here. And yeah, I've got I bought them all, to be honest. I bought Crash religiously, and then I bought Sinclair User and your Sinclair because I just couldn't get enough. I was completely addicted. That was my life. The Spectrum was my life at that point. That and Adam and the Ants, obviously.
And did you key in any of the listings from things like your Sinclair as well?
Very early on. I remember a period when I had chicken pox and I was off school for 2 weeks. And all I remember from that time was playing the pyramid and typing in listings that usually failed. I don't know if it was my typing skills or what would happen was in the next month's issue, there would be a correction. I spent like 3 hours typing that in and it didn't work. And now you've published the correction. It was a bit grim.
Did you ever write any games yourself as well?
Yes, I did. A lot. I was about 13 and we'd had the Spectrum. It was just after Christmas 1984 and me and my nephew sat down and I'd started writing little books because I'm a novelist. So even back then I was writing stories and I'd written this really, really abominably awful book called The Voodoo Plot. And I thought, yeah, I'm gonna make this into a game. And I programmed it in BASIC with big blocky graphics. I've still got it, but I will never let anyone see it. So I wrote the game in a day in BASIC and saved it to tape. And my nephew was looking at me because he was 3 years younger than me. So he would have been about 10. And he was looking at me in awe, like, my God, you are a programming god. And it's just the worst game you could ever see. It's like it's worse than all the listings you could get in a magazine. But then for me, it was the storytelling side that I was in love with. I just didn't realize it at the time. So I carried on writing games and eventually I hit a point where I was writing in BASIC. Then I started writing little machine code routines. And then I would write large machine code routines, but the main loop would be in BASIC, which I would then compile using Highsoft Cult, I think it was called, or Highsoft, whatever it's called, and they would run pretty fast like that. And I sent them off to various publishers, and I remember having chats with Atlantis, Mastertronic, and Codemasters. I think it was Richard Eddy at Codemasters, and I was really, really close to getting a game published, but I never did. So in the end, I set up my own software company, Psychedelic Hedgehog Software, and sold them mail order for a while, and then I got them published on Crash and Sinclair User cover tapes. So I had at least, 10, 15 maybe games published on the. So it was it's like Tenacious D. It was my tribute.
I'd heard a rumour that you'd written a couple of games. I didn't know it was so many.
I wrote a lot. I loved it. It was like, it's why I became an author, because I would read. You see, my math skills are crap, right? So as a programmer, it took me a long time to work out how to do masking and OR and XOR commands and stuff like that, to get you have a sprite and then you have a negative image of the sprite, so you can remove it from the background and place a sprite on the background. Every frame recycle. And it took me a long time to work out how to do that. And it kind of led me on to writing, because I realized that my math skills weren't good enough, or my programming skills weren't good enough to make it as a professional programmer. So I realized I loved the storytelling side of it. So I diverted into writing books when I was about 17. I wrote my first book when I was 14 on a typewriter. But the frustration was, like, if you mistype a word or make a spelling mistake on a typewriter, you got to type the whole bloody page again. So I turned my Spectrum into a word processor. I got TaskWord 2 and I bought a Citizen 9-pin printer. And I don't know what the interface was. There was an interface that connected the Spectrum to the printer. And I distinctly remember I wrote my first novel, but the Spectrum could only contain 3,000 words in memory. So every chapter was 3,000 words long. I would basically fill the memory with a chapter and think, right, I'm running out of memory. Right, I'll end the chapter. So that's how I became a writer. You know, the Spectrum helped me become an author, which worked out very well in the end.
When I first got Taskword 2, I did some of my 5th year homework on it and took it to school. And people were amazed that I brought some printed sheets in from home. It's even on that old perforated paper you used to get, like, you know, continuous sheets of paper.
You had to rip the edges off, didn't you, after you printed it?
So where have you found the best places to play games nowadays? Do you go to many conventions or arcades still?
I've been going to a lot of conventions like Revival and Play. When I came to make the first Spectrum film, I kind of fell across Revival on the internet, and it was at that point co-run by Chris Wilkins. So I messaged him and said, like, you know, I'd like to come and do a bit of filming. Is that okay? And he said, yeah, cool. So that's how I got involved with Chris. And then me and my assistant director and a photographer, the three of us went down to Revival. I think it was in Wolverhampton, Walsall, I can't remember. We went over to the Midlands somewhere, and John Romero was there, which I only found out on the day. Sorry, prior to this, I'd messaged. See, I'd got the kind of inklings that, like, I wanted to make a film about the Spectrum. I didn't know how I was going to do this or what equipment. I had a high definition camera, a Sony, which cost $5,000 at the time, that I'd made a horror film with. The problem with making a narrative movie, the problem is your actors. And like Alfred Hitchcock said, you know, like, what he described them as cattle, didn't he? Pushing them around like cattle. They're a pain in the ass, to be honest. And so I'd written a script, made a horror film, and then I'd set up a very expensive film shoot to do a scene, and my actors would turn up and they'd either not learnt the lines, they'd forget the lines, they'd rehearse the wrong lines, or they'd just look at me and go, I'm not doing that. And I go, why didn't you tell me 4 weeks ago when, like, we set up the film shoot and I've booked this place? And so it was a real pain in the arse. So after the first horror film experience of making it, I was kicking around looking for another project, and I thought, right, I'm going to make a documentary about something. What could I... Oh, it's obvious. The Spectrum, you know, it defined my life. It was my entire childhood. And as a bonus, I get to meet some of these people who were like my childhood heroes. I didn't give a shit about John Bon Jovi and you know, Rihanna and all that crap. For me, my heroes were John Rittman and Steve Turner and Mark Jones and Steve Wetherill, who wrote Nodes of Yezod and Heartland. I mean, somewhere, I don't know if it's a book or a film, that they were our gods, which is a bit excessive. They're not quite gods, but they're definitely my heroes. And I'm a man who doesn't believe in heroes, but these were. So I'd been in touch with Chris Wilkins, and I thought I'll go to Revival. And I've been in touch with Mark Jones, who said, yeah, I'm up for an interview, but I still had a very basic camera at this point. Even though it cost $5,000 at the time, it only filmed in 1080p high definition. And he said, yeah, I'm up for an interview. Can I bring my mate, Simon Butler? It was like, ooh, Simon, you mean Simon who did Gift from the Gods and Cosmic War Toad? Yeah. Why don't you bring Simon? That'd be really cool. So we arranged a meet up at Revival. So I went over there with Roy and Gary, who was doing the photography. And John Romero was there. And I thought, I've got to try and blag this one. I've got to try and get an interview with John Romero, because obviously after the Spectrum, I got an Amiga, then I got a PC and went through the Doom, Quake process. Oh God, it's John Romero. He did the levels on Doom and Quake. He was doing a speech on stage, an interview on stage. But as I was queuing up to go into the room, he arrived with his, I don't know if it's his partner or his wife, Brenda. I'm assuming it's his wife because she has the same surname now. So I thought, yeah, the tactic for this is you always approach the wife. He went up on stage to do his interview. I went and sat next to Brenda Romero. And I was like, yeah, I'm a filmmaker and I'm a massive fan of John's work. And I'd love to interview him. And she's like, yep, I'll sort that out for you. So, all right, thanks. That's cool. And what she did was, there were about 10 people queuing to interview John Romero, and she just pushed them all to one side. And as John came off the stage, she took us to this interview room, just kicked everybody off and took me in first. with my camera guy and my photographer, and we interviewed John. And it was all thanks to Brenda, because the woman's in charge. What is it? The female of the species is more deadly than the male. She's always in charge. So there's a tip for fellow guerrilla filmmakers. So I interviewed him at that same place. I then did an interview with Mark Jones and Simon Butler, and then we did some B-roll filming around the place. And I saw Clive Townsend, but I was like 99.9% stressed at this point because of everything that had happened. And I was too frightened to approach Clive, which is ironic because then when I actually came to interview him, he's such a lovely guy. And the interview progressed really well with lots of cider.
It's weird that you couldn't speak to Clive for meeting John Romero. He's like the pinnacle.
I think I'd had enough stress for one day. I blagged this interview with John Romero and then went and interviewed Mark Jones and Simon Butler, which was stressful in itself because you don't mess with Simon. I handed him a list of questions and they were like generic questions, and I could see him looking at them and frowning and going like, what's this crap? What's this generic crap you've given me? And it was like, no. They're like starting point questions and then we'll kind of diverge. You need respect with Simon if you interview him. You need to know what you're talking about. You need to know his background because he doesn't take fools lightly. And I was a fool at that point. So I was naive, put it that way. It taught me an important lesson, actually, in interviewing, that you always research very well and you always, you know who you're interviewing and you know the background. And I mean, it helps that I was such a Spectrum addict that, you can name a name and I'm pretty much guaranteed that I know it and I know what games they wrote or what graphics they did or what music they did. But it taught me an invaluable lesson. Simon did. Much kudos to him for that.
Has there been anyone that you didn't think you'd be able to get that you did get, or anyone that you were still aiming to get for your films?
I didn't think I'd get Rick Dickinson, and he was such a gentleman. He was absolutely lovely. But the postcode he gave me took me to the middle of a field, and I sat there in the middle of a field thinking, where's Rick? And I had to phone him, and then he had to give me specific directions to get to his house. That was an intense interview. He was absolutely lovely. He was like, you think you're interviewing somebody and you think, this is just a diamond. He's giving me anecdotes about his times with Clive Sinclair. That was a highlight. But to be fair, every single interview or interviewee has been awesome. I've not had any negative experiences. Everyone's been brilliant. People I'd like to interview, and I've tried to get in touch with them, obviously. Clive Sinclair, Stamper Brothers, Tim Stamper. I've messaged him on Twitter, which is the only way I seem to be able to get in touch with him, and he just ignored me, which is fair enough. They were always renowned for being ignorant of magazines and reviewers, and they let the products speak for themselves, which I kind of respect that. I kind of do that with my books. Yeah, Matt Smith, the bugger. I really want to interview Matt Smith. That would be a good interview.
Do you still play old games today?
Yeah, I've got my original 48K Spectrum. I bought, a couple of years ago, I bought a proper old mono cassette player from Argos because they actually still sell them, bizarrely. My original cassette player is dead as a dodo. So yeah, I've got the 48K Spectrum, and then I bought, a few years back, I bought a 128K plus 3. And every now and again, I'll crack them up and actually load a game off tape. I love the tactile experience of loading a game. Obviously, I've got emulators and you can just go click, click, click and put a game on screen. But I like that original, that nostalgic experience of loading a game. Maybe it's just me. I don't know. For me, I'm regressing to my childhood, and it's like in the film Fight Club. He regresses to his little secret place, the ice cave, and the penguin says, slide And for me, playing on the Spectrum it's regressing to childhood when your problems in life was when to get the next Spectrum game. I had no other problems ever. I was in this little happy bubble, and in my bubble was me and my Spectrum. Yeah, so that's why I still do it. I think it's I know some people don't believe in nostalgia. I disagree with that. I think that it has its place, and if you had a happy childhood, which I did, that's the reason why. And I think in Memoirs of a Spectrum Addict, Load Film 2, when I interviewed Mel Croucher, he puts it perfectly. Actually, I didn't realise it until he said it. And he said that, like, you guys, you're not buying this film for the film. You're buying it to relive your childhood. And he was right, because I think that's how nostalgia works. It's like you're looking back on that happy time, not necessarily happier, but it's a happy time when you were a child and you were innocent and free. All you wanted in life was to play Head Over Heels or Match Day or Avalon or, it's like, what game are we going to play next? I'll look at the 500 games I've got and select one.
I think you're right. It's loading a game from scratch from tape is a much different experience to just firing up on an emulator.
Yeah.
It's the whole process of finding a tape, putting it in, putting your load quotes in. Watching the loading screen draw itself is another superb memory.
In the films, each chapter is introduced with a loading screen, and Clive Townsend did all the graphics for that.
Did he draw them from scratch, or did he use a camera and import them?
I think he kind of used, for some of them, he used scanned images, and then he would tweak them. He'd play around with them, and I've actually got some images that have never been used of people like Rick Dickinson and Mark Jones who were interviewed, and it was like a screen grab from the film that I then sent to Clive, and he modified them. He changed them into Spectrum graphics, but then modified them because of the colour clash and stuff like that. Yeah, he's brilliant. He's like a machine. He's you say, like, Clive, can you do this? And you get it like 3 hours later. It's awesome.
What was the best playground game at school?
Ooh, swapping Spectrum games. Obviously, completely legitimate, like, non-pirated, original games.
Literally, everyone I've spoken to has partaken in swapping of legitimate backups just for preservation purposes.
That's right, yeah. I got into a bit of trouble with this because, like, everybody I interviewed for the film, one of the questions was, what do you think of piracy? Like, did you pirate games? And has it had an effect on the industry? And wow, did I get a diversity of replies. But lots of people said, I never pirated games. Blah, blah, blah. And like people like Steve Turner, I completely believed him because he was focused on writing games. He said he never played games, but there was this guy, he had a friend who would come round once a week and show him all the latest releases. And his interest was, what is the technical level that they're achieving? Because I want to beat that. And, like, respect to Steve Turner for that position. He wasn't a games player, ever. He was a developer, and that was his focus. And then I got to, Mark Jones and Rich Stevenson, and they were just like, oh, yeah, we pirated games, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, in the playground, we were kids, and we swapped games, and we pirated. And they were completely honest. And that's something that I did when I was a kid. We swapped games in the playground. And then when the first film came out, they both came up to me and they went, we're getting loads of flack. And I'm like, whoa. I did it as well. It's not a big secret. But yeah, they were it wasn't so much a hatchet job. I was just portraying what they said. And to be honest, what I tend to do is I interview people, and then I'll show them the finished film and say, is that all right? And, like, for example, with the last film, the second one, Low Film 2, I interviewed Phil South, and he said some stuff. And, in fact, Nick Roberts as well. And, the Crash reviewer, and he did Nick Roberts playing tips in Crash. And they both said, ooh, that bit, I don't like that bit. Can you take that bit out? And I went, yeah, no problem. Yeah, I'm not out here to destroy you. Or I think the problem with an interview is that because it's real time like this, you're interviewing somebody and you ask them a question and maybe they don't anticipate the question, So they'll just give their honest opinion, and then afterwards, on reflection, they'll go like, "Ooh, maybe I shouldn't have said that." So the stuff I've got that is incriminating. Mel Croucher, yeah. Simon Butler, yeah.
There now follows a brief intermission, during which Andy reels off a few hundred of the incriminating facts inadvertently shared by a few of his interviewees. They include 6 things involving cassettes, 4 things involving fruit, 7 things that required a visit to the doctor afterwards, and 1 thing involving a greased ferret.
But I would never ever stitch somebody up, and I'll always show the video before, I'm trying to be professional here. I'm trying to make films that are a historic reference and that people will enjoy. I'm not out to stiff people, especially when everyone's been so great and cool, and we've genuinely just had a laugh doing the interviews.
So another thing that I know is you're a published author.
23 books out, yeah.
What did you read when you were young?
When I was a kid, I had a very inspirational primary school teacher, and she introduced me to Roald Dahl and Enid Blyton, and then I just read voraciously. I'm not an only child, but my brother's massively older than me, the old git. So he'd left home and got married, and so I was essentially an only child, but I wasn't. So in them long, boring moments before the Spectrum arrived, I would read a lot, and I read Enid Blyton, Roald Dahl, Alfred Hitchcock Investigates, Nancy Drew, and then I just read anything, to be honest. And then during school, I hooked up with a couple of very, very close friends, and we were swapping books all the time. And we started off with the nice stuff, your Terry Pratchett, and then the not so nice stuff like James Herbert, The Rats, The Fog. It's bizarre because I read The Rats when I was 13, and it's quite horrific and sexual. And then I met James Herbert not long before he died, actually. I met him at a convention in Brighton or Bristol, I can't remember. And I said, I'm such a big fan. Like, I'm a fanboy. And I was reading your stuff from the age of 13. And he just looked at me, like, with horror in his face, because it was like, you shouldn't have been reading that. Like, they're written for adults. Which I kind of get, because I write stuff for adults. My stuff's not for child consumption.
It seems quite paranormal what you write.
I started off writing, it was bizarre because I wrote quite a few books. I started writing off on the Spectrum, and I wrote kind of comedy fantasy like Terry Pratchett, but a lot worse. My homage to Terry Pratchett. And I'd started reading a lot of David Gemmell, and he was like I loved the kind of anti-hero, the bad man who then turns good to do the right thing for the world. So I started kind of trying to emulate that. So I wrote fantasy for a while, and then I really, really got into Philip Dick and Michael Moorcock, and I was reading a wide range, Tolkien obviously, and I was reading a wide range of stuff. So I started writing science fiction. It took me a long time, but I didn't do it to get published. I did it for me. I wrote because I enjoyed it. And it's like if somebody you off, I just put them as a character in a book, and then I cut the head off. It was like a catharsis. It was an exorcism. Like if someone really, really annoyed me, I'd just put them in. Like I'd name them, put them in, and then like disembowel them and have the bowels spilling over the concrete. And it was like, yeah, I like that. It's really cool. I'm actually playing God. That's what I was doing. I was being a god, which is quite ironic because I've just been watching American Gods, which is fabulous. And after meeting Neil Gaiman, who I didn't really like very much, I love his work now. But yeah, I was writing fantasy and then science fiction. And then I got an agent in 1996, a woman called Dorothy Lumley, who has sadly passed away now. And I'd written a book called Eternity Star, which was massive. It was like 250,000 words, which is pretty big. And Tim Holman, who's now the chief commissioning editor of Orbit in New York, and he read it and he went, it's great, it's a great thriller, but we want it to be a bit more science fiction-y. So I had to science fiction-y it up a bit. And that was my first book. That got published back in 2003.
What do you think about the adaptations of things like Philip K. Dick, where you've got the Man in the High Castle on Amazon.
I started watching Man in the High Castle, didn't like it. I know that with Blade Runner, just obviously Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is one of my all-time favourite books. It's just a masterpiece. And I know that Phil Dick wasn't enamoured of it to begin with. I don't know if he was, in the end, if he was bought over by the money, but it misses out on certain important aspects like Mercerism and the Tomb World and things like that appear in the book that are not in the film. The film, obviously, Ridley Scott focuses on more kind of the android aspect and the retirement by Deckard. I think it's a brilliant film, but I think the book is 100 times better. I don't know. I'm a believer in reading the book first. Unfortunately, I've watched American Gods and I've just bought the book, so I don't know what it'll be like in comparison to the show, but the show is brilliant.
I've not got that kind of imagination where I can pick up books easily. I've got to really focus on them.
With regards the imagination aspect of books, you see, I get bored really, really easily. So all my books, they just kick off. What started it was, in 1991, I went to the cinema and I watched Total Recall, right, with Arnold Schwarzenegger. So the big Austrian oak, like, that film just rocks. It just kicks off from the start. Bang, bang, he's being pursued. He doesn't know why. And it was just the most awesome film I've ever seen. And I thought, I'm going to write books like that. So I don't want to be bored. You pick up a book and it starts wombling on for like 200 pages about beekeepers. And it's like, I'm not interested. I don't want to read this crap. So when I write, it kicks off on page 1, right? It kicks off and it just starts going. So I'll give you an example. I wrote a book called Twilight of the Dragons, and it starts off with this little girl and she's playing in the street, but she's really sad because she's got no friends. And then she's got a little dolly, and there's a big village fete going on, and they're all dancing and singing and drinking mead, as you do in the fantasy environment. And then this little group of girls go, do you want to come and play with us? And this girl comes up and says, yeah, come and play with us. And she's really, really happy, and she goes and plays with them. And then they say, right, let's go to the village centre. And they all start running away, and she runs, and then she drops a dolly. So she stops and turns, and as she goes back to pick up a dolly, there's a little dot on the skyline, and it accelerates, and it's a dragon, and it picks her up in its mouth, lifts vertically into the sky, and then just closes its jaws, and her arms and legs fall off in a big, like, fountain of blood, which rain down on the villagers.
That's chapter 1.
That's the prologue.
That's superb.
And the Kickstarter book that I was writing, it was like a reward for hitting a certain level of funding. And I said that I'd write a 100-page novella. I've already gone past that 100 pages. I'm writing down my memories of each filming experience. And because there were so many people involved, it's just going on. And it's like everyone was unique and exciting. It's like when I interviewed Mev Dink. What it is, there's this philosophy of guerrilla filmmaking, which is don't tell anyone you're doing it. Because if you tell them, they'll usually say no, right? So I'll just rock up at a hotel and then we'll just find a room. Like with Jace Austen, I'd filmed in this Georgian mansion just outside the M25 orbital, and I picked him up from Euston. We went there, and he's like, have we got permission to film? And I'm like, no. And he's like, what we're going to do? So I went up to the receptionist, and I picked the youngest one. I just went, is it all right if I do a bit of filming with my camcorder around here? And she went, oh, yeah, no problem. And I just took that as kind of AAA access all area. So me and Jace wandered round, and we found this boardroom, which was all kind of wood-lined with like loads of books. It's like a library. And I went, yeah, this is perfect. And he said, yeah, but look, there's all sandwiches on the table. There's been a conference here. And I went, yeah, but they've gone now. I said, well, let's set up here. And he went, well, what happens if they come back? I said, well, we'll just move somewhere else. So he helped me carry all the camera kit in. We snuck it past reception and did this beautiful interview in this wood-panelled library-type room, and we didn't get caught. Well, we had bought beer in the bar, to be fair, at their extortionate prices. So I figured we'd earned it. It's like when I filmed Clive Townsend, I was messing about with the camera, and he went off for a smoke, And the hotel where we were filming, mansion, it was a Georgian mansion where we were filming, there was like a little maze in the grounds, and he went for a wander. So I was kind of filming him, just messing about, just testing the camera, and I was filming him. And then as I moved the camera off him, he did this like ninja forward roll over the hedge, and then came up with his cigarette intact and carried on smoking and walking. And I just got the edge of it, so I put that in the end sequence of Load Film 2. And he watched it and he went, he messaged me and he went, I can't believe you filmed that. I didn't realise you were filming at that point. I said, oh yeah, I film everything, mate. It's kind of an inherent threat.